So I'd like to open this session by acknowledging that where I'm currently sitting, I know that we're coming from different areas, and I'm not quite sure how widespread we are, but I'm certainly across Atlantic Canada. But I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I'm currently situated in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. The territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship. We are all treaty people. So I would encourage you just to take a moment to reflect where you're sitting and what the Indigenous region is that you're currently situated in. So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming to the session today. And we're very, very excited about this. This is our inaugural session of our expert panel series, and it's part of the Systemic Racism Task Force. It's another piece of the work that we identified was an important part of activating change around combating systemic racism. I have a deep honor of being the coordinator for the task force. And all that means essentially is that I send out the emails, but I'm deeply honored to do that. The task force has been an amazing group. We've been meeting since June of last year, quite intensively. And we are represented across clubs from Nova Scotia, and we have membership from Newfoundland as well. And our focus for the first phase of this work has been anti-Black racism. And so when you see the materials in the toolkit, which we released in January, it has that orientation, and we fully expect that we're going to launch into other phases of the work, including looking at anti-Indigenous racism in the spring. So just before we get into it, and I won't take up a lot of time, I just wanted to, from a personal perspective, one of the things that I've also have the honor of doing is when clubs reach out and they want to learn a little bit more about the toolkit, we've offered to present and sort of make ourselves available to talk about the toolkit. So that's been a deep honor for me. One of the things that I'm learning in a personal growth point for me is, as I'm going through these conversations, as I'm engaging with my task force members, as I'm learning how to sort of navigate this journey myself through systemic racism, as a middle-aged white chick, I have to learn how to sit very uncomfortably in my own privilege. And that was not something that I expected, actually, because I feel I'm very open. I feel I lead with my heart. I feel that equity is at the forefront of one of my core values. And of course, I don't feel that that's not the case. I feel that's still the case. But the fact that I had to actually go through that journey as well was certainly an awakening for me. So I feel incredibly privileged to be working with the task force members, for them to allow me to open my heart in that way. And I invite you in the space to actually listen openly and with your heart, and engage certainly with an open mind, and just be willing to receive all the amazing wisdom that our four panelists have to share tonight. So thank you very much. And Cheryl, over to you.
Okay, everyone. And thank you very much, Lori. Just before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. Just to remind everybody again, and to thank Holly for all she's doing here in the background. If everyone hasn't, could they please mute themselves and put your screen on speaker view? Okay, we'd really appreciate it, and thank you. Everyone registered today was sent a pre-event package with an agenda and bios on all this evening's speakers. If you don't see that email in your email box, check your junk mail, because you could find it there. Tonight's speaker presentations have been pre-recorded, but all four speakers are here this evening from our speakers panel, and we are so glad to have them. The speakers will be broken down into two segments of 2 speakers each. Following each segment, one question will be asked of our panel speakers, who will each have 1 minute to respond. And Lori generously has volunteered, and she's going to handle all that for us. So that's terrific. Thank you, Lori. We invite everyone to place any questions you have for our panel speakers in your Zoom chat box, which you'll find below, and to complete a survey that'll be sent to you at the end of this event. If your question's not selected this evening, please don't worry. All the data is going to be captured here tonight, and it's going to be responded to by means of a Q&A format. I'm very pleased to present our first segment speakers, who are Dr. Hamed Daraji Awat, and he's a longtime employee of National Research Council, and he's well known in both industry and academic settings. Followed by Dr. Felicia Egan, who is a retired professor from Mount St. Vincent University, and she is a strong advocate for peace, human rights, and a strong community leader in social justice. Our second segment speakers will be Professor David Devine, a published author, columnist, and speaker on areas relating to social justices, and is also the managing director of Footprints Life Coaching. Finally, we have Godfrey Chankatira, who's an accomplished criminal defense and immigrant lawyer, well known for his skill in representing people from all diverse backgrounds.
I'm Ahmed Daraji. I am from Africa, born and raised in Africa. Came to Canada a long time ago in my early 20s. The question for tonight that was asked by our task force is, what is wrong with this picture? This is the question, a main question. And before I answer that, I have to admit that I did not know much about any kind of racism except blacks. So I did not know about systematic racism before I watched George Floyd dies live on TV. At that moment, the question became clear to me. I was angry, shocked, and upset. And I expect Canadians to dig deeper in their hearts and their souls to find ways to eradicate racism, not only in Canada, but also helping other countries to eradicate racism in general from all over the world. We are all equal. Doesn't matter, black, white, visible minority, we are all equal. So after the George Floyd incident, I became much aware of what racism, systematic racism is. And I start observing things, events, situations, circumstances around me. And for somehow, the more I learn about the topic, the more I see systematic racism everywhere, at work, outside of work, in the society, even within the activities, sports activities, whatever. So why this question is important? That's another point. Why this question is important? The question is important on two levels. First, we need to create harmony and peaceful society. And racism will not contribute to either harmony or a peace. So that's one. The second point why this question is important is economical, because by marginalizing a group, blacks or any minority groups, we are saying to them, you cannot contribute to our prosperity. Blacks, like everybody else, and visible minorities like everybody else, have talents, have force coming from within. They want to prosper. They want to live life as it should be. When we marginalize them, we tell them that you are not worthy of contributing to our society, basically. So that's the second point that I'm trying to get into it. And in my circle of activities, and over the years, I have seen people of color and minorities, visible minorities, go through systematic racism situations. I'll give you a couple examples. One example, I've seen a black guy was included in the management team because the management team wants to use him as a token, saying, well, we have blacks on the team. The company has 25% immigrants, and yet they have only one person, and they say, well, we have it. So this tokenism idea is really bad, and it should be eradicated from all our institutions. As you can see, I'm more talking about the professional side of things and what I saw in my activities rather than on the streets. The second example that I could say, which is opposite to the first one, is the fact that some blacks and visible minorities are marginalized in the workplace. So on one hand, they can be used as a token. On the other hand, they could be marginalized. And marginalization, it's bad for the person, and it's also bad for the company productivity, and it's bad for the country when you consider the economics and what they can bring to the table. Systematic racism is widespread, and and I think we have to look at it deeper and think about it, reflect about it, meditate about it, and see where these sources of systematic racism exist and how can we fix them. How can we fix them? It's through education. I live in Newfoundland, which is partly isolated island in the middle of the North Atlantic. And I interface with lots of people. And Newfoundlanders are by no means racist. They're good people. They're wonderful people, but they need education because sometimes they act in a way that I think it's racist. So lots of good meaning people might get into the pitfalls of what we define as racism. So education is the key, and education started from the kids at the school level. When I look around me, and this is not criticism, but just an observation, for whatever it is worth, how many ministers we got in this province that are blacks or from visible minorities, how many deputy ministers we got. So somehow the high echelon seems to be like ceiling that cannot be reached. Why? Well, people in the government argue that we don't have too many blacks and too many visible minorities in this province. And the question is why? They come and they leave. Although the government has good policies that emphasize the racial justice and accommodation and inclusion, the system on the ground is not reflecting the policies. The system on the ground is simply reflects what people think, not necessarily the policies. Immigrants traditionally come here to Newfoundland, they contribute to the economy. They leave within a few years, and I talk to some of them and they say, well, there's not lots of opportunities here. Why we don't have opportunities? Because simply the policies that we have are not reflected on the ground. So education and implementation of the existing policies are key to eradicating, at least not getting in Newfoundland, not getting into situations where systematic racism does exist. My final thought is this. We are all the same. This social disease or social cancer called racism in general and systematic racism in particular gotta be eradicated. And we do whatever it takes to eradicate it. I don't profess that I know a lot about racism. I don't. But these are my observations within the last year or so since I watched George Floyd dies on live TV. Thank you very much.
What's wrong with this picture? Black Lives Matter painted on the streets. My first reaction to this question is that there is absolutely nothing wrong with the painting on the street in bold words, Black Lives Matter. Without any doubt, the news have been explicit with many examples of how blacks are treated poorly and killed. Concrete examples include Trayvon Martin, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd, just to mention a few. hardly anyone had been accountable for this death. Black lives are really in danger every day. Now, let me ask a question. If our Creator came to this room now and said, I'm going to give you the option to become Black permanently, Black, so you can have the Black experience, how many of you would take his offer? Why or why not? If the same wish is extended to Blacks to become white, how many do you think would take the offer? Why or why not? Therefore, Black Lives Matter, painted on the street, is a scream for help for justice and not intended to say other lives do not matter. Why is this important question? It is important question because it helps to open dialogue, to respond to those who argue that all lives matter. But here is the point. If all lives matter, why are Blacks persecuted all over the world as if our lives do not matter? It is an important question because as humans, we are all created. We all have a right to live and deserve to be treated with respect and dignity. We all want to be happy. No one wants to be treated less than human. Because according to the Bible, we are all created in the image of God. Do not get me wrong. There are a lot of good white people. Some even helped me and mentored me. But overall, why do white people treat Blacks with disrespect? If God is everyone, if God is in everyone, aren't you hurting God if you hurt a Black person? Maybe if we understand the root causes, it will help us to start addressing the problem. What I think it means when we are thinking about systemic anti-Black racism. I think the cruel effect of systemic anti-Black racism is that Black has been systematically oppressed and denied opportunity to succeed like others through slavery, colonialism, institutional structures, oppression, discrimination, and police brutality. Barriers are always put in our way, whether in education, employment, and or in politics, leading to poor performance and abject poverty. Black parents live in constant fear, afraid for their children's lives due to all kinds of discrimination and police brutality. Blacks are portrayed in the media as violent, criminals, aggressive, stupid, lazy, and other things to dehumanize them. Above all, even law courts continue to mete out unfair judgment for Blacks that result in a highly skilled incarceration rate in contrast to other populations. Banks finding little force to deny or increase the interest on their loans. COVID-19 deaths result in North America also is a testament to this truth. Who gets the oxygen and care, and who gets to die if we must choose? Now, let me share a few of my own experiences of anti-Black racism with you. I traveled with one of my May colleagues to do a project in Africa. On our way back, we changed planes in Amsterdam, going through customs to embark on another plane to Halifax. The white man who was checking our passport told me to stand aside and allow my white male colleague to pass through. He took my Canadian passport and was trying to examine it thoroughly, trying to pull to see if the picture will come out. So my male colleague asked him, "We came together. Why did you let me just pass through easily? And now you are giving my colleague a hard time?" The custom official explained that on my Canadian passport, it is written that I was born in Ghana. So he was trying to make sure it is not a forged passport. My colleague laughed and said, "On my Canadian passport too, it is written, I was born in England, and you let me pass. So what's the difference?" My friend was shocked. I said, "Welcome to the club." I told him this is our daily life as Black people. People are always suspicious of our activities. When I applied for a promotion to associate professor, most of my work in Africa and references were not accepted because it is perceived that nothing good comes from Africa. When my kids do well on their tests at school, some teachers ask if they copied from someone. As a professor, during graduation, people will see me march and sit with faculty, yet many will congratulate me for graduating. Yes, I am Black, therefore I cannot be a faculty. When I'm sitting alone in the advisory room to advise new students, some peek through, see me, and leave to go to the office before they are redirected back to me. Others ask me where the advising professor is. In their minds, this Black woman cannot be a professor. My daughter goes to PEI restaurant with her basketball team. They all order food. All her white friends with the same order get food. She alone was served burnt food 10 minutes after everyone else. I can go on forever. What I feel the call to action is related to this question. First is to acknowledge that systemic racism and Black oppression exist. One must be willing to help to address the issue. You are either part of the problem or the solution. We just need to be intentional in our decision making. People in leadership position need to examine their unconscious and conscious biases and be intentional to ensure biases are kept out of their decision making regarding Blacks and other minorities. You can be mentors and allies to Black people and minorities in your company to help them become successful. I succeeded in my career because some white mentors and colleagues had the courage to stand up for me. We need to love others unconditionally to bring out what is best in them. Final thoughts. It takes all of us to be engaged and actively working together towards a solution on this issue. As Black people, it makes us weary to repeat ourselves in a struggle which has been going on for centuries. We are tired of inequality, and it is first on our lives. Hence, the symbolic scream on the street that Black lives matter. Not that other lives do not matter, but specific focus on us is required because our lives are in constant peril. We are pleased everyone is awake because 10 years from now, we do not want to have the same conversation. We want to see action and change. We are tired of telling others that the melanin in our skin does not make us stupid or criminals. Just as blue eyes do not make white people more superior. Our differences make us unique, just like everything else in nature, to help us work together to reach our goal as humans. Government policies, practices, and decision-making processes can help to change some behaviors, but cannot change minds and attitudes. Ideally, each individual needs to acknowledge there's a problem and start the process with listening to learn, self-reflection, and taking action to effect change. We also need to commit to educating our children with the truth to bring about positive change. If we all want to have peace and happiness, we need to treat each other with respect, dignity, and love. This constant oppression and discrimination of Black people must end. We are tired.
I'm actually quite speechless, which for those that know me actually know that that's a rarity after listening to those two talks. So thank you so much, Ahmed and Felicia, for sharing from your heart. It's actually quite moving. And I'm trying not to be emotional right now. Does anybody have any questions for the speakers? We're going to stop for a couple of minutes and just take a couple of questions. You could, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed both of the presentations on there. And I want to phrase my words carefully on there, because there's some things that I agree with, but some things that I think that we're not doing enough. Although the driving force for the concern about systemic racism has come from the Black community, in Canada, we have our own Aboriginal community, which is also very disadvantaged. I don't want to compare which one is worse than the other, but it all comes down to my view that people view people who look different or act different as somehow being different, and therefore we assign them roles as being better or worse. So my questions are twofold. Should we have a broader concept of systemic racism, or perhaps it's not even just racism, it's discrimination, since our homosexual, lesbian people are discriminated heavily against also. And secondly, although I agree strongly with the need for education, I think it probably starts even before school age. I think that's not to say we shouldn't do something with the adults, but as a pediatrician, I feel that we have to reach down to those very early days when children are starting to recognize differences and try and deal with it effectively that way. So I'll leave those two thoughts and ask both the speakers what they think of trying to perhaps make this systemic racism activity of District 7820 a little bit broader.
Do you want me to jump in, Laurie?
Sure. Yes, absolutely. I mean, you know the orientation of the task force, so you go right ahead.
The systemic racism is just a small part of the racism in general. And Laurie could elaborate on that. We started with systemic racism for Blacks because that was the starting point. But there are racism against Aboriginal people, women inequality, gender inequality. There is a whole bunch of issues that needs to be tackled. And I guess we discussed that before in our committee. We focused on systemic racism for blacks because we want to achieve something. Otherwise, it gets too big, too quick, and we achieve nothing. When we close this file, probably we're going to open another file. I don't know what. Probably talks are being made about Aboriginal people. Could be that's the next step. But you are absolutely right. It's a larger issue, and I agree with you.
The Canadian Pediatric Society also has a task force on this same issue. Do you think there's an opportunity to work together with other Rotary, work with other groups and try and do it jointly?
Perhaps. I'm going to jump in there, Doug. Perhaps that's certainly something we can take offside. And, just to build on Ahmed's point, we did, as a task force, make the decision early on that we were going to focus on anti-Black racism because we were inspired by and driven that we wanted to be part of the change after the murder of George Floyd. But we recognized that we wanted to build a framework that could then be leveraged for this conversation for other groups. So we recognize it's a much bigger issue, but we needed to start our focus first. I have one question from Barbara. How do I know if I possess racial bias that I am not aware of? So Felicia, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, I think sometimes being a racist is not kind of overt because you are not conscious of what you're doing because you've been raised with certain values and you've grown up with it. So you will not know sometimes that you are. But when the person you are talking to, kind of tells you that maybe what you said or did is not good or is racist, you have to listen. And that's when you know that what you did is not good. So you listen to people, you watch them, and also see their reaction when you are interacting with them, because sometimes we are not conscious of what we are doing. Some of it is not conscious, and some are also conscious because it's embedded in the system itself. So you just do it without thinking about it. So you have to watch, and if somebody complains, then it's good that you listen and don't be offended, so that you work with the person, and that's how you learn and change your situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Felicia. I just like to pose one question to both of our speakers before we moved on to the next two speakers that we have. So just assuming that you're a person who's just beginning your journey around learning about systemic racism, what's the best way about going about learning about it? And then once you've sort of built up sort of some knowledge and competency about applying it. So Ahmed, would you like to go first? And then Felicia, if you don't mind.
I think the best, as I said in the video, I'm no expert whatsoever. I just observe things around me. And the best advice that I give people is to do exactly what I did, because you get involved, assuming that you have the interest and you have the passion for it, for the reasons that we mentioned before. And once you get involved, for example, you can consult our resource manual that we are putting forward. You can the library, the toolbox, you can consult those. What happened when you read those, some key words click in your head. And while you are going around with your day, working or with the family or with friends or whatever it is, you see things that remind you of that particular issue in the resource manual, and you can start developing your own knowledge. I think from my point of view, that's the best thing I could advise with, is go to the resource manual. There is lots of experts who helped putting that resource manual together, and that will trigger your mind and it becomes a subconscious issue.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Felicia, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, I think the first step is to acknowledge that there's an issue. And then once you're aware and you acknowledge that there's an issue and you want to do something about it, then you have to start learning about the issue. So you kind of read about it, or go to talks like this where you learn about it, and then you reflect on what you are hearing. Because if you don't reflect and apply it to yourself, then it's just head knowledge. But you have to use it, the knowledge that you are getting, to kind of apply it to yourself, examine yourself, and then see which areas you can help with the situation. And because that's very important, because a lot of racism is kind of based on mindset. So you have to reflect and see which mindset is making you, behave in certain ways, so that gradually you can start changing it. You can't change overnight, but then the first step is acknowledging and start working and make friends with people, so that you learn more from them. And then attend, well, Black activities. This is Black month. So if you are able to attend some of the Black month activities, you start getting to know them better, because when you are closer and you know them better, you realize that they are human like yourself. Thank you.
Rotary Club. The title of my presentation is Race is a Socially Constructed Idea and therefore can be socially deconstructed one step at a time, starting with you, the listener. Whiteness, according to Michael Eric Dyson, in his book, Tears We Cannot Stop, A Sermon to White America, published in 2017, often termed white privilege, is, and I quote, an identity one inherits and perpetuates. That is, an ideology one might flourish under and, in turn, help mold. An institution from which one benefits, an ethos in which one breathes, a way of life, end of quotation marks. This is a universe that the Black person has to adapt to and negotiate with from his own parallel universe. Institutional racism, Dyson defines as, and I quote, a system of ingrained social practices that perpetuate and preserve racial hierarchy. It requires neither conscious effort nor individual intent. End of quote. The fabricated ideas of race and the institutions, systems, social forces, practices developed to operationalize those have weight, have consequences, have negative impacts on Black bodies. Such racism is often hidden, and putting a face on it for those who say they are unfamiliar with it or who argue that it does not exist demands the patience of a saint on the part of those of us who experience the impacts of it on a daily basis. But we are forced by the oppressive structures to operate largely in a parallel universe. And a consequence of that, if we wish to take part in interaction with the other, is to seek to make it clear how their taken for granted worldview and the systems that underpin it affect ourselves. Our histories illustrate how much of an investment we as Black people have made in showing how we are daily impacted, and the outcome has been marginal. That said, it has not diminished our efforts to engage, but there are growing signs that we need to spend less energy and time in this area and devote more effort and talent on focusing on our own self-development as Black individuals and increasing the social compact and agency of our communities of belonging. Black children and youth need to be assisted to be aware of the world as divided into the dual universe that I've described of white privilege and that inhabited by Black people of African descent, and why that is so. They also need to be prepared to function competently in both, and that demands a thorough grounding, at least in basic interpersonal social skills and education that includes being smart on the street, being able to control yourself, being able to adapt, being able to understand what's happening in the world and resist it. They also need to be able to achieve educational goals and expectations of children and youth, preferably to the optimum level possible. And such preparation must be tailored to the uniqueness of the individual child or youth. Knowledge of history and legacy is critical, but not at the expense of the foregoing. And awareness of lessons learned from the past and opportunities provided to encourage new ideas and practices to evolve without us as elders feeling threatened by that is absolutely essential. We as elders were experts on being children and youth when we were children and youth in a time and set of circumstances now past. Yes, some of the lessons learned and some of the circumstances painted differently now are certainly still valid today. But we need to learn from the children and youth of today and allow ourselves to do that. The background noise has changed. The sand on which the children and youth stand is even not another footprint evident. They are the pioneers of now. We can guide from afar as elders, humbly, tentatively, respectfully, lovingly, but it is their footprints that will leave their mark on the future, not ours. We need to trust them, just as our forebears trusted ourselves, to honor and uphold their legacy, without us even being born in their time. We need to encourage them to be confident, take planned risks, be bold, and reach for their rightful claim to be treated with respect and humanity. So see me, acknowledge me, learn about our joint histories, our contributions to the society we all live in, and your role in benefiting from the social constructions of race, which have left such a toxic divide between yourselves, your privilege, and ourselves as Black people. Acknowledge that you share in this historical responsibility and subsequent accountability. You individually are not the sole owner of this culpability and being held to account, but you are part of it. Hope for a brighter dawn, as Dyson rightly argues, in respect of the United States of America, but is equally applicable to other geographic areas in the diaspora, such as Canada. And I quote, can only come about if we first confront the poisonous history that has almost unmade our nation and undone our social compact. Quoting Martin Luther King, Dyson continues that we are inextricably bound together in a single garment of destiny. And in conclusion, Be courageous in reaching out and work with us to see how we can turn this toxicity into a freshwater, clear river that sustains us together. Let us not forget or reinterpret the past and the present to suit your purposes, but build on the evident Black truths and forge a future based on a new platform, pieced together by highlighted lessons learned from the pains of the past and pointing in a direction based on faith, hope, and trust in one another, that we will not repeat what went before. I believe this will happen, or we will end up destroying one another and there will be no winners. Let us instead win together. Thank you for listening.
I am going to begin by quoting Dr. Martin Luther King in his autobiography, that our ultimate aim was not to defeat or humiliate the white man, but to win his friendship and understanding. As we do this, we should be guided by the four-way test as Rotarians of the things we think, say, or do in our fight against anti-Black racism. And I believe the first step in doing this is to ask yourself the question, is it the truth? And my comments are going to be informed by the things that are being done to try and create awareness and address the issue of anti-Black racism. So, for example, I am looking at things that people are doing, signs of Black Lives Matter, either in our cities or on public buses. And when I look at those, the first thing I ask myself is, what is the reason for this? And the answer to that is that there is racism, and for that matter, anti-Black racism everywhere around us in our society. So the fact that we have those signs up, whether on buses or in our cities, for example, in the city of Halifax, we have Black Lives Matter painted on the middle of one of the streets in Halifax. That is a bold step taken by the city to acknowledge, first, that anti-Black racism is still a problem, is still a canker. And secondly, to bring awareness to people that this issue is far from over. So why is this important? It is important because, again, there have been some efforts by people like Dr. Martin Luther King and Nova Scotia's own Viola Desmond in fighting anti-Black racism for decades, and yet the problem still persists. And while progress has been made, it sometimes feels like the fight against anti-Black racism causes rage among some people. And the response from those people, in some cases, is deadly. And it manifests itself in the senseless killings of Black people in the hands of some law enforcement officers. It is therefore important to recognize that the fight against anti-Black racism itself can be risky sometimes. So the question is that in order to fight this fight, you need to understand what we're dealing with. We're talking about systemic racism here. And what is it? What is systemic racism? In my opinion, it is the policies and laws that are created by white people over several decades that created a society where whites are seen as superior to Black people and people of color. A systemic racism is not about individual people and what they think. It is the whole political setup, the economic structure, and the social structure that enables domination of white people against Black people. It refers to the structure that is created that allows for some sort of messaging or communication that seems to give or that positions white people that give them power to control the affairs, whether it's economically, socially, or culturally. And we can see this type of messaging through either people around us, or we can see it through even movies, the way Black people are portrayed in movies. We can see it through the news media. We can even see it internationally through what is usually called soft aid, where Western countries provide aid to developing countries in a form of helping them, but in a way controlling affairs, extending, again, the power of their dominance. So it is important for people to understand that when you talk about racism and you talk about white supremacy, to quote Robin DiAngelo, it is not just an individual thing, it is a superstructure that is created over several decades. So the real effects of anti-Black racism are the high incidence of welfare dependence, poverty, crime, drug addiction, school failure, and teenage pregnancy that we see in Black communities. Black communities are plagued by these incidences, and some race theories describe it as creating a permanent underclass in Black communities. So what do we do? How do we deal with this issue? How do we deal with anti-Black racism? Again, I'm going to quote Dr. Martin Luther King in his book. He said, "Man's inhumanity to man is not only perpetrated by the vitriolic actions of those who are bad, it is also perpetrated by the vitiating inactions of those who are good." I think this is important. We're talking about taking action. So now that you have acknowledged that there is racism and you have been aware or you have educated yourself about its forms and nature and have self-reflected on it, it is time to take action. Taking action simple means the little things that you do and the bigger picture things that you can do to help tackle racism. To take action is important as observed by one speaker. In order to take action, you need to scrap everything you may think you know about anti-Black racism, dismiss your worldview regarding anti-Black racism, and let go of the comforting but flawed narratives that you may tell yourself about it. So, for example, do you get defensive when someone discusses racism and racial issues with you? When someone points out that there is racism in your club or in your organization or your own behavior is racially problematic, will you take time to ask, how do I deal with that? And would you reflect on it? Would you apologize? Or would you become defensive in dealing with this situation? When you want to tackle racism, you may not necessarily have to look at others. You have to look at yourself first. Instead of turning the mirror to other people, you have to turn the mirror to yourself. And rather than, blaming someone else, take a closer look at your own situation. Take a closer look at your own club. Take a closer look at your own self and see what are the things that you can improve, or you might make improvements to create an enabling atmosphere to help tackle racism, to make people feel comfortable in your club, to want to discuss the issues and not feel severely, chastised for bringing the topic up. So my friends and fellow Rotarians, these are the things that we need to do as Rotarians if we want to take action.
Oh, so thank you, Godfred and David, for those very moving talks. Really, really appreciate you providing us with some things to think deeply about, to feel deeply about. We're technically 5 minutes over our time, so we're going to be really concise with our questions. If anybody has any questions that they'd like to pose to the speakers, if they could just put them in the chat and I'll convey them. In advance of seeing any, I'm just going to pose one question to both the speakers. If someone was to take one action right now to sort of activate change within their own communities, to bring awareness and activate change around systemic racism, what would that be? So David, would you like to answer that one first?
Certainly. Thank you, Laurie. I think the first step for anyone thinking of addressing the issues that we've spent an hour talking about this evening is to increase your knowledge. We've all got to be perpetual students in this area. None of us are the fully fledged experts that we may think we are in respect of this issue. So I would suggest most strongly that we increase whatever learning base we have further in order to address this particular issue. It's very painful. It's very challenging. You yourself, Laurie, this evening have talked about your own challenges. I have challenges as a Black man in this area too. So let us be humble. Let us be perpetual students and take it from there. Thank you, Laurie.
Thank you, David. Godfred, would you like to share your response?
Yeah, thank you, Laurie. And David has said it all. What I will say is that in order to take action, you have to be prepared to have uncomfortable conversation, awkward ones, and sometimes they're not going to be pretty. Sometimes they may be unpredictable, but as long as you put your head to it and you are prepared to have those conversations, then you will be all right. I think it starts with, like David said, education. You need to read, you need to find information for yourself. And once you arm yourself with that, the conversation becomes easier for you to deal with. And I think these are the things we have to know. You got to be prepared to have uncomfortable, very difficult conversations.
Awesome. Thank you. So I have a question. Can the speakers suggest some books that people should read to give them a good understanding of racism, as well as actually, I'm going to take that one. Certainly the speakers can suggest their favorites, but our resource guide that's actually posted to District 7820 has some deep information around different resources that you could use to build awareness and sort of build your understanding of systemic racism and anti-Black racism. And if folks are on the call and they're not familiar, I think there's, because we were encouraged to spread this message far and wide, there might be some folks on the call that aren't Rotarians. I'm more than happy to put that in the chat. But if the speakers wanted to sort of highlight maybe one of their favorites, feel free. Anybody can jump in, David or Felicia or Ahmed or Godfred, anybody that has a favorite book top of mind to help people on their journey to learn about systemic racism.
I'm very happy with the question, Laurie, and your response. And I feel that each of us has had a complex personal journey to the point where we are now. And therefore, the books we read, the films we watch, the radio episodes that we listen to, and so forth and so on, are all tailored to that journey. So therefore, each individual has to decide for themselves what they feel might be the most pertinent instrument for their further education. And that's a very personal thing. And so therefore, I would respect everything that you personally wish to explore in order to increase your understanding, because it's personal. It's about you. It's about you trying to inform yourself. And so therefore, go for it. Whatever you decide to pursue will be more than acceptable, providing it leads you further on your journey of understanding systemic anti-Black racism. Thank you, Laurie.
Thank you, David. Would any of the other speakers like to weigh in with a favorite?
Well, I will say, Dr. Martin Luther King's autobiography, because it's a documentation of how to fight or how to deal with anti-Black racism. I know there is this word being thrown around, allyship, and I'm listening to people, and I'm beginning to even move away from saying be an ally. That book will teach you to be a friend rather than an ally, because somebody said allyship is fleeting. It's not. It's just for me, it's on the surface. If you are somebody's friend, you will kill for them, in quote unquote. So that's what I see in that book, and it's just when you read it, you're able to relate then and now and see where we are, and you realize there's still a lot of work to be done, but there has been some progress, and the book will help you in a way to find some of those channels.
Thank you, Godfrey. We do have a question about, do the speakers have any experience building bridges with Black communities through the use of Rotary service projects? Because we know that certainly hands-on service is a way that members like to be engaged. So Felicia, actually I know you're not a Rotarian, but I know that you are deeply committed to the community that you're working in. Do you have any suggestions? She might be muted.
Just to give Felicia time to come to
Sure.
tune in, I certainly have significant periods of time in my life, going back over 40 years actually, working with Black communities around the world in terms of developing ideas about how we can, as Black people of African descent, spend the sort of time that we need to spend on ourselves, on our very complex histories, which are very diverse amongst the Black population here in Canada. And there's no such thing as a homogenous Black community here in Canada. We are communities, plural, and we all have differing histories, expectations, aspirations, you name it. And so therefore, we really have to spend a lot of time in individual Black communities to understand their particular concerns and issues, and then working out with them, they as the leaders, of course, to work out how best to address them. So yes, my answer is yes. I spent a lot of time, over 40 years in this area, and that continues, Laurie. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, David. Felicia, I see that you're off mute. Would you like to?
Yeah, I think it's important that you spend time with the communities, like David said, because when you spend time with the different communities, then you realize their need. For instance, we have the Black Nova Scotians who have been here for a long time. Then we have the immigrants who came here. We have similar issues, but then the immigrants who came here, we have another issue of trying to learn the culture here, which we don't know. So we bring our own culture too, and sometimes it creates a lot of problems for us. So we face the Black issue, and then we face the immigrant issues too. So when you go to the individual communities, like David said, it helps you to understand that community more. Like you attend their functions. For instance, my community, we used to have a lot of galas, but scarcely will you see a lot of white people coming. Mostly it's the same Black people. But when we go to those galas, we educate, we tell them about our culture, our background, and so forth. So if people are interested and then they go to the community functions, they will learn more. Like I try to go to Indian functions and other functions because I want to learn more about them. So I think that will help if, like Godfrey said, befriend people and also attend the activities so you learn more about the different people. Thank you.
Thank you, Felicia.
What I can quickly add to that is there are a number of national organizations here. Like Felicia said, we have the Ghanaian Association of Nova Scotia, we have the Nigerians, we have the Cameroonians, you have Sierra Leoneans, Liberians, and all that. I know folks usually say Africa, but Africa is made up of 50 countries, and people are here and they try to organize that. And so look out for some of those events. And so for the Ghanaian organization association that I'm aware very much closer to, we have 3 events, a number of events every year. We have the Ghana Independence, the Republic Day, which coincides with Canada's Day. We have the welcome, events for the new students. So when you attend these events, you learn a lot. You learn the food, and when you talk to people one-on-one, you realize that you're going to end up having to realize that there are 90% of things that you have in common with people than our differences. So you're going to hear somebody say, "Oh yeah, oh wow, oh really, oh that kind of thing." So it's important to be open and to learn from those organizations.
Thank you so much. Ahmed, I'm going to give you just an opportunity to quickly share your thoughts on this, and then we're going to bring this to a close. You might be on mute, maybe.
Sorry, I was on mute. I always start talking before me and mute. I think the key into it all, it doesn't matter what the activity is awareness and education. As Felicia said, education can be got from attending events, and Godfred also said the same thing, from events or reading books or talking to guys experts like what is Dave Divine, talk to him, and once you are educated and aware, things become clear. And when things become clear, then you can behave properly because you are aware of it. And my circle of friends here, when I started talking to them, they loved the handbook and the toolbox that we have, because they are a bunch of engineers and doctors, and they don't read many books other than engineers or, or medicine. So they like to read simple things like what we have produced, but accurate. So I advise everybody to go there. It's simple, it's easy to read, and it's accurate. It will not point you in the wrong direction. So that's the only advice I could give.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ned. All right, my deep, deep, deep gratitude to the panelists. There's no way we could have done this and pulled this off without you. So thank you so much for being brave enough to be our first series of panelists. And my deep gratitude to everybody who registered for the event and showed up to be part of this experience. We will be issuing a survey to all the folks that registered, please fill that out. And because we know we want to sort of improve every time we do this. And if there's any of your questions that you had that we didn't get a chance to answer, please put them in the survey and we'll do our best to sort of consolidate the responses and get them in a Q&A, as Cheryl said earlier. And I just want to, I guess, just say thank you. This was just such an amazing, amazing event. And this is exactly what we wanted to happen. And just such a masterful speakers and engaging questions. So I'm personally very happy with the event. So thank you to everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Have a lovely evening. Take
Yeah,
care.
thank you.
Bye-bye.